Welcome to the Politics Substack Live. I'm Elise Labott, and I'm here with my colleague Stephen Cook, who's still trying to figure out this is his first Substack Live. I'm coming to you live from the Rohnert Park, California Bureau of Cosmopolitics. I'm out here in California visiting my mom. You can see her little needle point in the
Oh,
background.
that's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty, kind of looks a little Mid-Eastern-y, or maybe
Yeah.
Asian.
I thought it was Kulthum for a second.
Yeah, that's exactly who it is. My mom's like here listening. Anyway, I just wanted to get you on. I said in my little promotion that working with you at the Council on Foreign Relations, I'm the Edward R. Murrow Fellow. Say what you are, because I always say your title, because I
I'm
always
the
get it wrong.
Eni Enrico Mattei Senior Fellow for Middle East and Africa Studies.
And who is Eni Enrico Mattei?
Eni Enrico Mattei was a very significant figure in post-World War II Italy, who basically set up the Italian energy industry as the chairman of what is now known as Eni, which is the big Italian oil industry. And somewhere back probably 15 years ago, the then CEO of Eni wanted to set up through a foundation a chair in honor of the Enrico Mattei, given his important role, and they set up a chair at the council. I'm the second one to hold it.
Okay, well,
yeah.
I
actually, it's funny. I've never actually met anybody at Eni.
Okay, well, hopefully someone from Eni is listening. And,
yeah, they can bring me to Rome. I'm happy to chat with them.
Let's do it.
Okay.
So I'm going to start doing these Substacks live from time to time. And while I'm here, and I know my friend Danny Pletka, both of our good friend Danny Pletka of # What the Hell WTH podcast, which is certainly how I'm feeling about the region right now, is watching it. We're going to do happy hour hot takes on Thursday. So I know Steven.
Oh, that's excellent.
Will join us, and that'll be fun.
And I do owe you a bottle of wine. So
you do owe me a bottle of very good wine.
Yes.
So I asked you to do this, and I said, like, working with you at the Council on Foreign Relations is so much fun.
We're working?
Yeah, exactly.
We're working.
But this is like what Stephen and I are all day long, just riffing on various things going in the Middle East, because I
had like a 14-hour flight to Doha. I think I texted you more than I texted my wife.
Well, it's just so comical. It's we're able to find these, riffs on it because, look, I think for many years what was going on in the Middle East was, just very predictable. It was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was Iran. And now, I don't know, in the last year or two, really, and especially since October 7th, the whole region has been turned on its head, not only by the October 7th attacks, but in large part with everything that happened after Israel's war on Gaza, and then all of the military operations in Lebanon against the Houthis, I think against Hezbollah, against Iran, everything that's going on with all the big important leaders that have been killed. I think we're looking at a dramatically different Middle East even before President Trump came in.
It's kind of wild, right? I mean, we have these moments in the Middle East. Remember, like 2011, 2012, it seemed like the world was changing, and then the region just kind of settled back into patterns that we had become quite used to. I mean, the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians endured. Authoritarianism in Egypt endured. I mean, I think the big changes obviously were Syria fell into civil war. Gaddafi was gone, but Libya's, fragmented. And all of these things seem like momentous world-changing events, and then they weren't. And then we had, about a decade or so of these kind of regular patterns that we sort of grew used to and maybe even complacent about. Because remember, just before the October 7th attacks, in a now infamous foreign affairs piece, then National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the Middle East
is quieter than it's
was
ever
more
been.
stable than it had been in 2 decades. And I think there were people who saw that there was a lot of change that was happening in the region, but there was also kind of problems that were lurking and things that remained quite unresolved. And one of those obviously was Gaza and the Israel-Palestine conflict. And once again, we're in this moment, or the last 18 months of momentous change. I mean, I was thinking about it the other day. how many things have happened in the last 18 months that people told me would never happen? Right?
Hassan
Totally.
Nasrallah gone.
Nasrallah gone, Hamas decimated.
Sinwar gone.
But Nasrallah gone without there being this massive
Yeah.
decimating conflict that
Right.
destroyed both Israel and Lebanon. I mean, I remember in June 2024 talking to fairly senior members of the Biden administration where I was trying to impart to them my view that Israel was the risk of escalation in Israel's north and Lebanon's south. And they said, the Israelis should be very, very careful if they do that because it'll take them 30 years to rebuild the north, and even parts of Tel Aviv will be destroyed in this devastating conflict that everybody was envisioning between Hezbollah and Israel, which didn't come to pass. And the Israelis haven't defeated Hezbollah, but have greatly weakened it, including killing Hassan Nasrallah, the longtime leader of Hezbollah, who is basically part of the Iranian power structure. I mean, extraordinary, which the knock-on effects of this have been quite interesting. I mean, when Assad found himself in trouble once again because of the force of Israeli arms in the fall of 2024, Hezbollah was unable to muster the forces to help defend him. And of course, Hezbollah had been this, expeditionary force of the IRGC throughout the region, even before October 7th, in the form of the proxy groups. So as a result of
it's like this
the
domino
war,
effect.
as a result of this war that Hamas launched to destroy Israel, actually the effect is a weakened Hamas, a greatly weakened Hezbollah. Iran has lost its Western Front. It's lost its second strike capability, and is greatly weakened as a result. Even Iraqi militias are now said to want to negotiate with the government in Baghdad to lay down their arms because they're afraid of both American as well as Israeli airstrikes. Now, of course, Iran isn't giving it up. They've been smuggling weapons and money into the West Bank via Jordan. They've been stirring up trouble in Syria, but still, the region has the power has changed. There's been a shift. Whether this can be converted into a new regional order, or like the Arab uprising, sometimes referred to as the Arab Spring, this opportunity for change is missed for whatever reasons, and the region sets back into a set of not exactly the same, but definitely familiar patterns. And I think at this moment, when the president is promising negotiations with the Iranians, is one of those, to use an overused term in Washington, an inflection point.
Right. Well, I mean, I want to get to the meeting. I want to get to the meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump in a minute, but let's go to Iran. But I will say, when you were talking about this, whether they can seize this opportunity, I think it was Aaron Miller, who used to say that the Israelis never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. But I had to throw that out there.
I think Aaron was riffing on.
We could get into that later.
Aaron was riffing on. I think it was Abba Eban, the Israeli foreign minister. I mean, from a long time ago, who said the Palestinians never miss an opportunity.
Well, I think it's probably true in both their cases. But President Trump, his policy on Iran has kind of, had wide swings since his first term. He came out of, he withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, said he was, willing to negotiate another deal, never did. Ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC at the time. And now, yesterday, in this dramatic announcement, which was kind of shocking but not surprising, I would say, you and I were talking earlier, that that the U.S. is going to have direct talks with Iran about a new nuclear deal on Saturday, which is so ironic because I think Prime Minister Netanyahu was coming there to make the case for a military strike against Iran. So how do you make this, dramatic announcement? For those who have been following it, kind of saw maybe the writing on the wall that President Trump wants to make this great deal. But what do you make of that?
Well, look, I mean, I think, first of all, the president, the reason why it was shocking because of the way he just sort of tossed it out, right? He's like, oh, and by the way, we're going to have direct negotiations with Iran, with the Israeli prime minister sitting next to him, where there was no formal announcement. It was in the middle of this meandering soliloquy about like almost everything. He said, "Oh, and by the way, we'll be having direct high-level talks with the Iranians." I was like, "What? Wait, did I hear that
Yeah,
correctly?"
I mean, I was like, what?
And of course, the Iranians are saying they're not direct; they're saying they're indirect. But like, really, what's the difference at this point?
Right.
The other thing that's striking about President Trump, for all of his bellicosity on Iran and saying, Obama's deal was the worst deal ever, he's basically taken a book from President Obama's playbook. He's taken a page from President Obama's playbook. I mean, Obama was able to apply very serious and stringent
Pressure.
sanctions on Iran. He just didn't call it maximum pressure. So, and the whole idea of these sanctions and restrictions on the Iranians are to bring them to the table for a negotiation. And President Trump has been absolutely consistent about his desire to do that. So, the idea that Trump was going to was going to attack the Iranians seems far-fetched. Seems people reading into his bellicosity more than what it really was, which was a negotiating strategy. I mean, he has deployed a lot of force to the Middle East, but Trump is always most bellicose before he actually wants to sit down
That's a great observation.
and do a negotiation, right? And there were previous times when it would have been perfectly legitimate for Trump to use military force against the Iranians in the summer of 2019, when the Iranians were seizing oil tankers, mining the Persian Gulf. They attacked Saudi Arabia, and he backed up. He didn't do it because he didn't want to get involved in yet another foreign adventure.
And that
in the
caused a lot of tension with
the Saudis. The Saudis were
Emiratis.
attacked, and it was standing U.S. policy that the United States would defend the oil fields of the Gulf from both internal and external threats. And the president said, "Hey, they didn't attack us; they attacked Saudi Arabia." And so there was tension with the Saudis, the Emiratis. The Israelis were really concerned about it, which kind of led to hedging with the Chinese and the Russians on the part of our partners in the region. Nevertheless, to bring it forward, I think the president has been very consistent, and we're going to have this negotiation with the Iranians, and everybody's kind of like, okay, let's see what they come up with.
And now the Omanis, who also were like the original interlocutors for the
this really is the Obama policy. That was the opening that led to the JCPOA was done in Muscat, in the capital of Oman. So, but the Iranians kind of insisted that the Omanis be.
Why is that? I mean, I think at some point we have to do something on Oman, because I feel like it's like this enigma. They're very powerful. Right. They're doing a lot of things in the region to help move things along. They also were the ones that started helping with the talks between the Houthis and the U.S.
Right. So they've had for a long time. They've had open but not formal relations with the Israelis. I think the Iranians prefer the Omanis because over the Emiratis, who were a possible intermediary, because this is a role that the Omanis had played for a long time on across a number of conflicts in the region. And they have a lot of and there's a lot of sensitivity in Oman to Iran, as well as a lot of sensitivity and cultivation of Oman's relationship with the West, but particularly the United States. And I suspect what the Iranians see, even though the Iranians and the Emiratis have developed relations over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, I suspect they see the Emiratis as being too close to the United States and too close to the Israelis, really, to be an effective, effective mediator.
The Abraham Accords.
Right, exactly.
So President Trump says we're having these direct talks. Iranians are saying they're indirect, but as you said, it's a distinction without a difference. How are the Iranians playing it? Are they making this like this is a serious thing? Or is this just kind of everyone putting their toe in the water and seeing that there's something possible? Because I feel like the Iranians have wanted to avoid making a deal with Trump at all costs, and now, we're looking at a new region right now, so they really may not have a choice.
The Iranians seem to be playing it cool. They're like, okay, we'll see what happens, right?
As they do, as they're prone to do.
They're very, very good negotiators, and so they're gonna. And I think actually, despite not having their economy is in bad shape, their air defense systems greatly weakened, their proxies not as powerful as they once were. I actually think the Iranians go into this in a pretty strong position, because the president has made it clear that he wants a negotiation, and he has a history of backing away from using military force. So I think despite the disadvantages that the Iranians have going into these talks in Oman, I think that they probably feel pretty confident and pretty confident in their abilities to negotiate. Like we both agreed, they're very good negotiators. And this is entirely new territory for Steve Witkoff, the
Well,
president's
yeah, I
Middle
wanted
East
to
envoy.
ask about that. So, Steve Witkoff, President Trump's Middle East envoy, that also became his kind of Ukraine envoy. This
Let's
is a
put it this
real
way. Steve Witkoff is the real national security advisor, not Mike Waltz.
well, and he's a real estate developer. So is you know probably doesn't know that much about Iran. Obviously has relationships with the Gulf states, but and we just talked about how great the Iranian negotiators are. Even look, even people like Wendy Sherman or Jake Sullivan or Bill Burns like said like the Iranians were serious negotiators.
Right.
How does that play out with someone like Witkoff, who's if you listen to some of the reports coming out of Moscow, he flew to Moscow on his own plane, had dinner with Putin with his girlfriend, and look, this is
I
a
mean,
whole new ball game for
come
Steve
on,
Witkoff.
Elise. Negotiating over a new exclusive development in Miami is totally the same thing as
Yeah,
negotiating
of
a nuclear
course.
program,
Right,
right?
right.
No, and I
So
think,
how
look,
does that? Obviously they would have to have a team of more
right.
serious experts on Iranian nuclear, but even just negotiating, sitting down with Iranians, like this is something he's never. If he
No,
is in
he's,
fact going to be the negotiator,
well,
he
this is one of
hasn't
the,
ever
yeah, I mean,
handled anything like this
this
before.
is one of the things that at the Trump administration, that because the president is a real estate guy, and because Witkoff, who's close to the president, I mean, they're golf buddies, is close to the president. And there's always this focus on deals. I mean, when Jared Kushner was basically in the role that Steve Witkoff's in, he always talked about like how many deals he had done, as if this was going to give him some sort of advantage in the rough and tumble world of international politics. And the Iranians are tough customers. They've been at this a long, long time. And I think that, the idea that, as I just said, kidding around, negotiating over, the development of exclusive property somewhere is somehow the same as this. I mean, you need as advisors who have real serious technical expertise. It's not about sitting around a table and saying, okay, you get a little bit of this and you get a little bit of this, and we'll all walk away
You
happy
get a
with what
little
we got.
uranium, we get a
You're
little.
right. So I mean, again, Witkoff is obviously not a someone who is dumb or doesn't understand, but at the same time, this is totally different. This is completely different from what his professional vocation is, and one negotiation is different from another. Is different from another negotiation, and I think that unless there's someone who has, I'm not saying that you have to be steeped in Iranian history, politics, and culture, but unless there's someone there who can kind of give you sort of insight into how the Iranians go about this, you're at a great disadvantage. And I think because the president has signaled that he wants a negotiation, he's put Witkoff somewhat at a disadvantage going in, even with 2 aircraft carriers in the region and 7 B-2 bombers in the Indian Ocean. But we'll see.
I
We'll
mean, I
see.
think this was one of the problems that the president had, right, with his love affair with Kim Jong Il. Like, it's one thing to kind of play to people's kind of, TikTok or narrative tweets, narratives, but when you're negotiating with a country that has this long history and culture and tradition of whether it's nuclear ambitions or territorial ambitions or regional ambitions, if you don't understand that, and look, I think that was even one of the problems over many years with many administrations, particularly in the Middle East,
Right.
that U.S. administrations and officials and negotiators over the years really did not
Right.
understand the
That's exactly
culture,
right.
the attachment to the land, the attachment to their,
Right.
not
We
their
always
sovereignty, their
we
integrity.
And that seems to be a problem that's compounded by the fact that the president and Witkoff come at this as like, well, we're great real estate negotiators. We should be able to do this kind of thing without understanding all the really important factors
Yeah.
that go into this for the people on the other side of the table. I'm glad you mentioned Kim Jong Il too, though, and the
Kim
North
Jong
Korea
Un,
thing.
sorry.
Kim Jong Un, sorry.
I always
Oh
do
God,
that.
right. Il was dad, right? Um, Kim Jong-un, because I wonder if the president sees that as a template for his negotiation with the Iranians. Of course, he's not himself
And of
going,
course, that wasn't successful. So,
and it wasn't successful, but there's a huge difference between the North Koreans and the Iranians.
of course.
Besides the obvious, the North Koreans have been spending, 60 however plus years trying to get the attention of the United States and be recognized by the United States and be treated as worthy of, a negotiation with the United States. And Trump basically handed it to them. The Iranians have never given up their goal, and they won't through this negotiation, of wanting to push the United States out of the Middle East. So the president entertains the idea that he's going to end up, having dinner with Ayatollah Khamenei and they're going to
Yeah,
fall in
and a Trump
love
Tower
is
in Tehran,
ridiculous.
right?
They want to
Right.
push the United States out of the
Yeah.
region because, as you point out, Iran and the regime, and this goes back even during the Shah's period, that Iran sees itself as the major regional power that can, dictate the rules of the game. But as long as the United States is there and its partners have established a regional order, it can't. So they want to push the United States out, not fall in love with Donald Trump.
Yep. I'm just going to reset a little. If you're just joining us, this is the Cosmopolitics Q&A
I'm going to move.
with, you're a little like,
it's hard for me to put it because I have my
shaky.
earbuds in.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Now we're visiting Palestine, I think. And also all of Steve's very impressive degrees are in the back as well.
No, my father's campaign poster from 1966.
Oh, that's good.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah. So we're talking about the announcement yesterday that President Trump said that the U.S. and Iran are going to have direct talks. Let's talk about this meeting yesterday between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. Usually, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu feels like he walked away with something. It helps bolster his case. Like, when you read the Israeli press, he got bum roasted, as my nephew would say.
I like that. I'm going to use that.
He walked away.
It seemed like a major blunder to run off from Hungary, which is a separate issue. And
that's the whole Hungary and the U.S. and
right. It's a whole separate issue. And then come to Washington,
right,
with no prospects of getting anything. I mean, what's the old thing about lawyers? Don't ask a question unless you know the answer. Don't come to Washington unless you're pretty confident.
Yeah, Congress doesn't put a resolution down if it doesn't have the votes.
Right. And so,
what was he coming for? What was he coming
Well, I mean, everybody said he was coming to tuck Trump out of the tariffs on Israel, but I think that was nonsense. I mean, sure, 17% tariffs, and the Israeli Manufacturing Association said it was going to hurt, but there are critical parts of the Israeli economy and critical things that the Israelis export to the United States that are accepted.
Well, he also said
like services like tech and defense industry stuff.
And
so
biotech.
It's like,
he also said to President Trump, we will, it felt like he was coming like, oh, President Trump, we will eliminate those, barriers.
Well, right. I mean, that's the way to deal with Trump. That's the way to deal with Trump. But Trump didn't budge. He said, well, maybe we will, maybe we won't. But, we give you like $4 billion. That's a lot. Congratulations, So he didn't get anything on tariffs. But I think that was cover for the real issue, which was to talk to Trump about Iran. And I think the writing was on the wall. It should have been on the wall to everybody that Trump was more interested in a negotiation, and that even though the Ayatollah had rejected direct negotiations, it opened the door to indirect negotiations, and that Trump was going to take it. And sure, maybe he'll call it direct negotiations, but whatever. Like we said, it's a distinction without a difference at this point. And I think that Netanyahu is coming here to try to impart upon the president that in those negotiations, Israel's interests should be looked after. And because you don't really know with the president. I mean, the president has indicated very clearly that he wants a deal. Does he want a deal for the sake of, security and stability in the Persian Gulf and global security? Or does he want a deal for the sake of a deal? Say, hey, I got a better deal than President Obama. Maybe it's both. But you don't know with this president. And that's not a political statement. That's just an objective observation.
He's got a deal because he's a deal maker and he likes to.
That's exactly
he's got like 3 or 4 deals going. He's got a deal to own Gaza. He's got a deal to end the Ukraine war.
Right.
Now he's going to have a nuclear deal. Like, this is like, let's make a deal ultra edition.
Well, and I think that this is a tension between Israel and not just this administration, but also the Biden administration and previous administration, but in particular since October 7th. The Israelis were very clear that they want to change the security environment around
Yeah.
them.
And
So whereas Biden,
the balance of
team
power in the region, really.
right, Team Biden wanted deals, now Team Trump wants deals, Israel wants victories. It wants to fundamentally change the security environment around it. So on October 7th can never happen, that its adversaries will always be on the defensive. And a deal, whether it's a deal with Hamas in Gaza or a deal with the Iranians, doesn't accomplish necessarily that goal for the Israelis. What the Israelis are concerned about is that there is no real deal in the offing, and that the Iranians are using this to rebuild their air defense system, to resupply and rebuild Hezbollah.
Which they probably are.
Which there's no doubt that they are. So this is a source of tension, despite all of the kind of obsequiousness and flattery that Netanyahu engaged in with Trump, which is not a bad strategy when you're dealing with Trump. The fact that underneath, Israel and the United States are not necessarily aligned on critical issues.
One thing, this also I think is really interesting, and people aren't really, I think, focused enough about it, is what's going on in Syria and the tension between Israel and Syria and how that could affect the United States. It could affect NATO. What are your thoughts? Now we have an Islamic kind of leader in Syria. Israel wants to make sure that there's no terrorism there, and so it's really making provocations into Syria. Turkey is defending the Syrian leader, but that I know privately U.S. officials are really concerned about it, but it could spill out into what you're calling a confrontation between a NATO ally and Israel. That,
right.
What,
the special relationship and the NATO ally. Right. I mean, look, Syria is super complicated in that you have a number of different actors: Israel, Turkey, Russia, the Gulf states, all vying for influence there. I think the Turks obviously had long-running coordination with HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which Ahmed al-Shara leads, who's now the self-declared president of Turkey. Even though for a long time the Turks wouldn't admit it, and HTS was what was once known as Jabhat al-Nusra, which was an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. And I think early on after Assad fell, people said, "Oh, there was a split. Ahmed al-Shara left, sort of the jihadi world. That there was a doctrinal split between him and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was the leader of ISIS." I think the split was less having to do with doctrine than it has to do with like power politics. And so I think the Israelis view him as an unreconstructive jihadist who is going to be hostile to Israel once he consolidates his power. And so I think that they're doing everything possible to prevent, even if he consolidates his power, prevent the possibility of Syria threatening Israel. And so they've moved into the buffer zone that the UN had occupied since 1974. They've gone well beyond that. They're trying to cultivate Druze population in the south. They've conducted like almost 100 military operations in Syria to destroy the Assad, the remnants of the Assad military, and most recently attacked an airbase known as T4, which the Turks have said that they would like to move into and help the new Syrian government reestablish sovereignty over its territory. And the Israelis regard Turkey in everything but name as an enemy state. I mean, they have allowed Hamas to run operations against Israel from Istanbul. They've allowed Hamas to leverage the Turkish financial system. And President Erdogan has been, full-throated in his support for Hamas. What goes on behind the scenes is somewhat different, but the Israelis, and Turkey is one of the few countries that has restricted trade with Israel. So the Israelis do not want the Turks to basically set up shop next door, and they have been trying to make sure that doesn't happen. The good news coming out of the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump yesterday was that Trump was very, very clear that he's got a good relationship with Erdogan. and he's got a good relationship with Israel, and that he made it, I think, pretty clear that he was going to, put on the black and white stripes and ref between the Israelis and the Turks there. And I think the Turks have signaled they want to de-escalate. They have not responded to what the Israelis have done. And Netanyahu also was, I think, pretty clear that even though there's no love lost between him and Erdogan, that de-escalation was probably the best move for them. But the Israelis are going to be on top of this. They are not going to allow this government in Syria to threaten him in any way, shape, or form. And if that means creating like a Druzistan as a buffer state, they're going to try to do that.
Last question. President Biden and then President Trump, this deal between Israel and Saudi was very important. It seems like it's kind of taking a back seat. We don't have any, progress really now in Gaza, getting rid of those remaining hostages. It seems like that ceasefire is all but over. Where does this go from here?
I don't think it goes anywhere, to be honest with you. The president's going to go to Saudi Arabia and,
next month.
Next month, right. What month is it? God, I can't even remember.
I think it's April.
It is April, right? Yes, it's April. And the president's going to go to Saudi Arabia, and I don't even know if normalization is going to be on the agenda. I mean,
I'm pretty sure it won't.
The price for normalization has gone up steadily since Israel's response to the October 7th attacks, to the point where Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman himself has said a two-state solution is required. He didn't leave it to the foreign minister. He didn't leave it to others. He didn't leave it ambiguous. He said a two-state solution is required. And you have, like more than 70% of Israelis who say that a two-state solution is not in the cards. So what are we talking about here? So my guess is, because the Saudis remain interested in having relations with the Israelis, that we'll go back to something where it was mostly under the table. The dialogue happened at the security level. There were some special visas for Israeli businessmen who nevertheless held other countries' passports, and so on and so forth, but not the kind of moment when Saudi officials, the ambassador here, Princess Rima, would say it's not a question of if, but a question of when. That was all pre-October 7th kind of rhetoric. That's all gone now. It's all gone.
All right. Well, certainly there's going to be much more to discuss. This was really awesome, Stephen. Thank you so much.
It was totally fun. We should do it next time. Let's do this where we're sitting in front of the computer together.
I love it. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Don't forget Thursday. I think it's 5 p.m. Eastern and I'm really bad at math, as everyone knows. 2 p. Pacific. Danny Pletka, Happy Hour Hot Takes. Stephen, I know you'll be there.
I'll totally be there.
That's going to be really fun. Danny and I have done some things in written form, but we're really looking forward, and we're going to have a special signature cocktail every week. So.
Look, if you're talking mostly about the Middle East, you kind of need that.
You kind of need a drink. That's why Brian Katulis has that podcast called Taking the Edge Off the Middle East. Well,
exactly, which is also another great thing that everybody should listen to.
Yeah, you're right. All right, thanks so much, Stephen, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
I'll see you when you get back from California.
Okay, thanks.
Say hi to Mom for me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.